My name is Lucy Collins, and I'm 29 years old. My phone buzzed like a warning light I couldn't ignore. Lucy, I'm thinking of letting Amber move in temporarily. She needs a place, and we have the space. I froze, staring at Stephen Adams. 31. My boyfriend of 2 years. The man I trusted with the quiet rhythm of my life. And there it was, my entire sense of security being casually rewritten in one sentence. I blinked. Interesting, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, something tightened, coiling around my chest. Tuesday night, 8:43 p.m. Our apartment was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen. I, Lucy Foster, 29, had spent the day folding laundry and organizing the space we shared. Amber, Stephen's ex-girlfriend from college, had been increasingly texting him, her voice lingering in his phone, even when I wasn't around. She was a shadow at the edge of our relationship, dismissed by him as just a friend, though the way he smiled at certain messages told a different story. So, you're inviting her to move in? I asked again, slowing my tone to measure my own control. Yeah, Stephen replied, shrugging as if it were nothing. Just until she gets back on her feet. Saturday, 3 months tops. I set down the plate I was drying, my fingers trembling slightly. 3 months tops. Funny how time suddenly felt like a countdown to betrayal. You told her what? She can stay in the spare room. It's not like she's using it for anything right now. Her roommate bailed, and rent here is insane. Thought I could help. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My mind was already racing, cataloging every scenario, every tiny invasion of privacy this could entail. You're serious? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Completely. You won't be weird about this, right? He smiled, leaning casually against the counter. I smiled faintly. Interesting choice, I thought again, this time privately. Not weird at all, I said. My internal voice whispered a warning. This is your space, Lucy. This is your life. You don't have to share it with someone who doesn't respect your boundaries. Later, after Stephen left to grab a late snack, I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Greg, our landlord. Hey, Greg, giving you the required 60-day notice. I'll be moving out when the lease ends. Let me know what you need from me. Within 5 minutes, his reply was there. Sorry to lose you, Lucy. You've been a model tenant. I'll start showing it in a few weeks. Want to be there for viewings? Nope, I replied. Whatever works. By the time Amber arrived on Saturday with a U-Haul, I was waiting, smiling politely, while my chest ached with unspoken questions. Boxes were carried into the spare room, her laughter filling the apartment like an uninvited melody. Stephen hovered close, his attention split, and I felt the subtle shift, the invisible thread pulling him toward her, away from me. Thanks for being cool about this, Lucy, Amber said, dropping a box with a thud. I nodded, my lips tight. Of course, temporary situation, right? Yeah, a few months max, just until I get back on my feet. That first week, it was the little things that whispered betrayal. Her gym bag by the door, protein powders on the counter, beard hair. Yes, she'd started bringing her new boyfriend's things occasionally, leaving them in shared spaces. Lucy, can you ask Amber to clean up? Stephen would shrug. She's going through a lot. Cut her some slack. But it wasn't just the mess. It was the way she angled herself toward him when we sat together, the way he laughed at her jokes, ignoring the small tendernesses he used to reserve for me. I started apartment hunting in earnest. Each listing I scrolled through felt like a small step toward reclaiming my life, toward a space where my voice, my comfort, my boundaries mattered. The real kicker came in week 4. Wednesday afternoon, I came home early from work with a pounding migraine, the kind that leaves your head hollow and raw. The sight that met me made the pain seem trivial. Amber and Stephen were on the couch, her legs draped across his lap, his hand brushing hers, laughing at something on her phone. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. I didn't say anything at first, letting the moment stretch. They noticed me eventually. Lucy, you're home early, Stephen said, voice casual. Migraine. Yeah, I replied, calm but cutting through the room like glass. I'll lie down. Amber tried to kiss my cheek. I turned my head. I was done pretending. The line had been crossed. My home, my lease, my comfort, it was no longer negotiable. That night, I texted Greg again. The next viewing was set for Saturday at noon. I didn't need to be there, but I knew I had to see the consequence of boundaries laid bare. Sitting on my bed that night, I realized this wasn't just about Amber moving in. It was about respect, priorities, and the invisible calculus of love and entitlement. And I would not compromise. Amber moved in like a storm disguised in casual charm. Boxes unpacked, clothes scattered, laughter filling the apartment at odd hours. Stephen greeted her with that warm, unguarded smile I once reserved for myself, and I felt the first sharp pangs of displacement. The first week, the little things began to accumulate. Her protein powders claimed half the counter. Her gym bag was always by the door. Her shoes, Stephen never mentioned anything, were left carelessly across the hallway. And every morning, I noticed it. The subtle way Stephen's attention lingered on her, the light in his eyes that should have belonged to me. "Babe, can you ask Amber to clean up after herself?" I said one Wednesday night, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's going through a lot, Lucy. Cut her some slack," Stephen said. His words felt like a gentle dismissal, but the underlying message was clear. My discomfort didn't matter. It wasn't about a gym bag. It was about boundaries, respect, my sense of home being invaded, piece by piece, without permission. By the second week, the intrusions escalated. One Tuesday, I returned from work to find Amber's friends in our living room. 4 strangers sprawled on the couch, laughing, playing video games, drinks scattered everywhere. "Hey, hope you don't mind," Amber called from the kitchen. "Just a few people over." I looked at my watch, 6 p.m. "How long?" "Not late, maybe midnight." By 2 a.m., my living room had been transformed into a chaotic playground, and I had an 8 a.m. meeting. The next morning, I tried explaining it to Stephen. "You can't expect her to just sit in her room all the time," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "She's allowed to have a social life in our apartment." Our apartment. Not mine, not ours, apparently. Week 3 brought the kitchen raids. I had prepped salmon, rice, and vegetables that morning. My careful work meant for a quiet dinner. Amber walked in, and I saw it happen. Salmon gone, rice gone, vegetables gone. "Oh, that's mine," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "My bad. I was starving after my workout," she said, waving it off. "You could have ordered something," I muttered, frustration coiling in my stomach. "Let it go, Lucy. It's food," Stephen said, brushing it aside. I stared at him, incredulous. Was this really how little my feelings mattered? By the 4th week, it wasn't small annoyances anymore. It was blatant betrayal. I came home early Wednesday with a migraine, only to find Amber and Stephen on the couch, her legs draped across his lap, his hand resting lightly on her thigh, both laughing at a meme on her phone. The sight froze me. I realized, in that instant, that nothing I had said, nothing I had done, had mattered. This was the pattern. This was my life, and I would not live it this way. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I planned, carefully, deliberately. Apartment listings became my nightly ritual, a quiet rebellion, a reclamation of control. Each scrolling thumb, each note to a landlord, each viewing scheduled without their knowledge was a small act of self-preservation. By the weekend, the inevitable had arrived. Stephen thought it was all fine. Amber thought she could bend reality to her will, and I, Lucy Foster, decided that boundaries, once crossed, deserved consequences. I was preparing to step out, not in anger, but in deliberate, measured clarity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. My survival. By the start of week 5, my decision had solidified. I wasn't going to negotiate with entitlement. I wasn't going to tolerate my home being hijacked under the guise of helping a friend. Amber had overstepped too many invisible lines, and Stephen, blinded by nostalgia, refused to see them. I drafted a final text to Greg, our landlord. "Hi, Greg, just confirming my 60-day notice. I'll be moving out at the lease end. Thank you for everything." Within minutes, Greg replied, "Understood, Lucy. You've been an ideal tenant. Showing starts next week. Need you for viewings?" "Nope," I typed. "Whatever works." Saturday came, and with it, the reality of Amber's entitlement. Boxes were packed and stacked, her casual smiles masking the storm beneath. Stephen hovered around her, offering help, laughing with ease, and I watched silently, calculating, planning. It wasn't long before the parents entered the fray. Carol, Amber's mother, materialized in my living room like a force of nature, her voice sharp. "We need to talk about what you're doing to my daughter." I met her eyes evenly, calm but unwavering. "I'm removing myself from the situation. Amber chose to invite her ex to live here without consulting me. That's her choice, not mine." "Where is she supposed to go?" Carol demanded, her tone tight with anger. "She's 27. She has parents, resources. She'll figure it out." Carol's face turned red, her voice rising. I want to buy you out of the lease. The landlord already has new tenants signed. I can't stop this. She left, slamming the door, leaving an echo of entitlement behind. Amber tried one last manipulation. Thursday evening, she appeared in the kitchen, her voice trembling. Lucy, please, I'll make Kyle. I stopped her. It's not about him anymore. It's about what inviting him showed me. Amber faltered. What do you mean? You prioritized your ex's housing over my comfort, our relationship, and basic respect. You didn't even think to ask me. Her apology came out in rushed, frantic words. I'm sorry. I didn't think. Please reconsider. I'll make it right. I shook my head gently but firmly. I accept your apology, Amber, but I'm still moving. This is done. I can't coexist in a home where my boundaries aren't respected. Amber's eyes welled with tears, but I saw the truth. Nothing I said would change the choices she had made. Consequences were unavoidable, and I would not flinch. The legal maneuver came next. Amber tried to serve an emergency restraining order, claiming I couldn't force her from the apartment. I called a paralegal friend, Theo. He laughed. She has no legal standing, he said. She's not on the lease. This will be thrown out in minutes. At the hearing Monday morning, the judge confirmed it. Ma'am, do you have documentation showing you are a tenant at this address? I've lived here 7 months, Amber said, hesitant. Are you on the lease? No, she whispered. The motion was denied. Civil boundaries, legal clarity, and respect for the lease were all on my side. Outside the courthouse, Carol screamed at me, but I was calm. My decision had been validated, legally, morally, and emotionally. Amber's choices were hers. My life, my boundaries, were mine. The emotional weight lifted slightly that day. I knew that by standing firm, I had done the hardest thing possible, protecting myself from chaos, masquerading as kindness. The storm was only beginning, but for the first time, I felt in control. Moving day arrived with quiet precision. Movers were at my door at 8 o'clock a.m., and I watched as the life I had carefully built, the furniture, the kitchenware, the electronics, was loaded onto the truck. TV, couch, dining table, bed, dishes, everything. Amber stood in the empty apartment, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. You're taking everything? She whispered, almost pleading. Everything I bought, yes, I replied calmly. I can't live with the consequences of your choices. Stephen lingered in the background, frozen, realizing fully what this meant. No amount of charm or persuasion could undo the boundaries I had enforced. Kyle, or Amber's ex, the reason this all began, paused in the hallway, staring at the barren rooms. Confusion flickered across his face, but I had no sympathy left to offer. Consequences weren't cruel, they were necessary. I completed a final walkthrough with Greg, our landlord. Everything was in perfect order. Security deposit would be returned, no deductions. You handled this well, Greg said, shaking my hand. Amber followed me to the parking lot. Where are you even going? She asked, pale-faced. A new place, I said, serene. 1 bedroom, better neighborhood, better building. Only $200 more than here. Her eyes widened. You could afford that the whole time? Yes, but this lease became unbearable because of your choices. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no argument strong enough to bridge the gap her actions had created. Driving away, I felt a strange mix of liberation and quiet sorrow. Not for myself, but for the version of Amber and Stephen who could never value respect over entitlement. My life was mine again. The aftermath was predictable. Amber returned to her parents' home, where rules were strict and freedom was limited. Kyle drifted from friend to friend, eventually returning to his childhood home. Stephen, once the center of my trust and love, was a reminder of misplaced priorities, now irrelevant. I settled into my new apartment, sunlight pouring through huge windows, new furniture I chose, space that was entirely mine. I felt the slow, satisfying pulse of freedom. Months later, I met someone new, Michelle, a pharmacist with her own boundaries, her own life. By the 3rd date, I shared the story. She listened, smiled, and we laughed at the absurdity of entitlement meeting consequence. With her, I found respect, humor, and the subtle joy of a shared understanding. Sometimes I ran into Amber. Once, at a restaurant, she greeted me softly. I'm sorry for all of it, she said, quiet. You were selfish, I replied simply. I accept that. But my life isn't yours to manipulate. And that was it. Closure didn't need apologies. Closure needed boundaries, action, and clarity. And for the first time in months, I felt entirely at peace. The lesson? The best revenge isn't dramatic. It isn't humiliation or schemes. It's living better, with integrity, without people who choose themselves over respect. I had done nothing wrong. I had simply claimed my life back, and it felt like sunlight. Months passed, and life slowly reshaped itself around the choices I had made. My new apartment, a sun-drenched one-bedroom, became a sanctuary. Each corner reflected my tastes, my decisions, my boundaries. No shadows of entitlement lurked in the corners. No whispers of betrayal threaded through the walls. I started to thrive. Work felt lighter without the weight of constant tension at home. Evenings were peaceful, filled with the quiet joys I had long forgotten. Reading, cooking, music, and the occasional glass of wine on the balcony while the city lights twinkled below. Michelle became a steady presence, not because she filled a void, but because she complemented my life. We shared laughter, honest conversations, and a mutual respect that felt like sunlight filtering through old clouds. On our third date, I recounted the story, how boundaries were crossed, how trust was tested, how consequences were unavoidable. She listened without judgment, understanding instinctively that this wasn't just a story of conflict. It was a story of reclaiming self-worth. Occasionally, I ran into Amber. Once, at a small restaurant downtown, I saw her hosting tables. She looked tired, older somehow. The spark of entitlement dimmed by reality. Our eyes met briefly. She whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." I smiled politely. "I accept that. But my life isn't yours to manipulate." No tears, no drama, just clarity. I had acted with integrity, and the universe had reflected it back. Amber's choices had consequences, yes, but my own actions had reclaimed my life. Even Stephen was a distant echo. Once, a mutual acquaintance mentioned him, how he was drifting aimlessly between friends' couches, finally returning to his parents. I felt nothing but quiet relief. The man I loved had been a chapter, not the entire book. Through it all, I realized the most powerful revenge, or perhaps the truest justice, was not spectacle, humiliation, or anger. It was living better, unapologetically, with boundaries intact and self-respect unbroken. The world moved on. Amber and Stephen faded into the background, and I thrived in a space that was entirely mine. I journaled one evening, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The best revenge isn't vengeance. It's claiming your own life back. It's choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over manipulation, and boundaries over betrayal. I did that, and it feels like sunlight through every window of my new home. 6 months later, a text from Greg, our old landlord, arrived. "Just wanted to let you know Amber asked for your forwarding address. Never gave it. By the way, new tenants? Nightmares. You were the best tenant I ever had. If you ever need a reference, I've got you." I smiled, letting the weight of the past lift completely. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, integrity, and the simple power of walking away from those who don't respect you. And in that, I found freedom.